Banya, you will pardon me if I'm only from African continent, where I live with the kids that side. Well, you provided quite an interesting presentation on the differences of religion, or on different religious perspectives in relation to religious tolerance, and also you've articulated very well some of the challenges that are faced as far as religious tolerance is concerned, in particular touching into social and also political challenges. I would like you to probably provide us with some information as of what is the position of the constitution of Sri Lanka in relation to religious tolerance, because I don't know whether it's silent when it comes to such, and what is its position in trying to mitigate intolerance or religious intolerance. And the last question goes to Dr. Lanka. It was a quite interesting presentation on human rights and terrorism, but the question that I have for you probably goes to also to the House at large is, what is terrorism and who is a terrorist in actual fact? Because for me, I'm trusting to, I've been having ideas, I think, for the past 5 years, and I've been questioning, interrogating the concept of terrorism to say, coming from where I come from, South Africa, prior 1980, liberation leaders such as Nelson Mandela were deemed as terrorists by the ruling government, which was an apartheid government at the time, and also even the United Nations, they perceived such leaders as terrorists. Post-1980, the United Nations came out and said, actually, leaders like Nelson Mandela are not terrorists. Post-1994, now they are liberated, they are celebrated as one of the most influential leaders in the world. So the question comes, therefore, who is a terrorist and what is terrorism? Should we accept the Eurocentric definition of what terrorism does? Terrorism really exist? Because elsewhere someone was talking about religious intolerance, and you remember most of the interpretation of the Western understanding of what terrorism is mostly against Hinduism, and it is against a particular certain race and a particular religious group. You know, they will go against countries like Afghanistan because of their religion, because of their race, because of what they believe in. So should we call the fact that America, I think it was 5 days ago, declared that they are going to send more troops in Afghanistan to make sure that they destroy the base of terrorists. And the question is that a just war or an unjust war? And who exactly is a terrorist? And where is this a terrorist? And between who and who? The question. I should answer that.
One, yes, we have still got 50 minutes left, so...
Thank you, Mr. Mandela. In my derivation, I have already stated that it's a discourse, it's a debate. Actually, I have told your terrorist is my freedom fighter. When you are glorifying your Mandela, justified. His freedom fighter against apartheid, but the white rulers branded him nothing but terrorist. In my country, in India, when freedom struggle was going on, struggle for independence was going on against colonial government, our soldiers, in a sense, our freedom fighters, who fought against British colonialism, were branded as terrorists, Jongi. But to our sense, to our culture, they are nothing but fallen heroes, shaheed. Then it's a great problem to identify one as terrorist and another freedom fighter. And it's our duty to demarcate the line clearly, vividly in between terrorists and freedom fighters. Thank you.
Then again, like current constitutional provisions to say, to promote religious tolerance in today's scenario, there is a debate ongoing where, like, when it comes to constitution, lots of scholars, when it comes to legal aspects, they define it differently, whether our constitution promotes only one particular religion, because it says in one of the articles that we are bounded to preserve Buddhism as the foremost religion in Sri Lanka. So today there is lots of arguments whether we should keep this in our constitution or not, because having that article, people can be interpreted differently, because even though it has said that it is the foremost religion in Sri Lanka, they again have mentioned that they are also respecting all other religions in the country. But here they are having an argument whether we should keep this or we should make some amendments for this particular article. So that is one of the states in current scenario, and the other one is when it comes to Sri Lankan constitution, we have our own national anthem, which is sung in only our mother tongue, which is Sinhala. So there is like an amendment after the LLRC commission that this should be, even though they have mentioned it in Tamil in our constitution, it was not pragmatic and it was not implemented. More or less in the country we were singing our national anthem in our mother tongue, which is Sinhala. But after this LLRC recommendation and after that of new government, so they started promoting this national anthem singing in Tamil as well. So those are the current provisions which I have experienced in promoting religious tolerance through constitution.
That of South African history, because almost everything that you've highlighted and touched into is exactly what we went through. So now my question is whether the challenges that you guys experience and how you got out of those challenges as far as conflict in this case. Is it because of our colonial history, because we ourselves in South Africa were colonized by countries like Britain, for instance, and it left us with the challenges that we found ourselves in, with one group being elevated over the other, and now having to wage a liberation struggle. Even though ours was not through a military one, it was through a negotiated settlement, and I think it's the same to yours as well. So it was quite interesting when you were reflecting on that, and I was asking myself, does our colonial history have a bearing on the present and the challenges that we're confronting as this nation? Thank you.
I think the question was, one ruler or one leader, be able to change and use different types of leadership theory. It's certainly probably the full answer would probably that would be perfect leader if you could do that. But I think the thing would be to always keep reaching for that ideal, right? And be able to be flexible in your leadership. And I think about something that the commander that I worked with very quickly, very shortly after he returned to Ecuador. We were actually supposed to do this project in the college, in the War College, which would seem more appropriate place to do research. But they had a plane crash and 22 paratroopers went down, along with the commander of the Special Forces, and who was tapped to be the next commander of the Special Forces. So that's why we ended up doing it in the operational unit as opposed to in the college. But then shortly after that, they had a huge earthquake, and they were, sent out to build a refugee camp for the people from the earthquake. And for him, he was able to be a very strong leader just because of the leadership training that he had, was able to say, when the general came to him and said, this is the way you need to do it, this is what's going to happen. And he was able, even in the lower rank, to be able to say, excuse me, sir, I respect what you have to say, but respectfully, I don't feel that that's the best way to do this. And here's how we need to collaborate with the outside NGOs and so on, or who are coming in. So I think it's always just to strive and we want to go into different ways to meet, but affection would be great. Okay, I think everyone would have something to say about the comment as far as forced marriages. I think everyone wants to say something. And I was wondering that myself on whether this is a universal concept or not, the kind of injustice women are suffering over there. And that's why I feel like everyone can engage with it, because everyone's country at some point or the other has experienced something like that in maybe an evolutionary process. But in terms of what you were talking about, I understand completely what your grandmother said. However, I do believe that perhaps the divorce rate in terms of forced marriages is lesser, not because they were forced marriages, but because there's a fear of, and there's a fear of so many factors that one makes it work. There's a fear of being ousted from the society. There's a fear of not being able to survive on your own. There's a fear of being looked down upon. Because, for example, in many of the case studies that I did, a lot of women who actually fought for their inheritance, which is their basic right, they are entitled to, were termed as the bad women, because they caused their family so much pain. And because of that, many women then don't go out looking for their rights, because then there's a bad cop, which like you can't really understand. So there's a fear of so many things, but I think the basic most fear is the fear of not belonging. And due to that, you make it work. But the minute you get a choice, and you have a choice to walk out, perhaps that's why the divorce rates are higher. And maybe like if they had a choice over there of having a society in spite of it, then they would have. But keeping that in mind, just lastly I want to say, even if many people do make it work in a forced marriage, I feel it's not the divorce rate that we should be as concerned about, but we are in this day and age. It's the quality of a marriage, a lot more importantly, that no one talks about. So a lot of people who've even stuck around in marriages, we have no idea what people have had to sacrifice in order for those marriages to work. And maybe that is something worth looking into.
I felt the similarities between the African people's struggle and the struggles of my people. Okay, I learned about appetite and appetite, Nelson Mandela's struggle and all those things from literature, because I read his biography, Long Walk to Freedom, and the poem written by Gwendolyn Brooks, the poem written titled as A Far Cry from Africa. So, at the same time, similar to that, so many literature pieces were written by Tamil writers. So by comparing those literary pieces, poems, short stories, biographies, yes, of course I found so many similarities with travel. And I accept that colonialism or British colonial rule was one of the reasons of the emergence of these ethnic countries.
Which comes back as another question, but comment presentation was really a wonderful presentation. When we look at the whole history and of ethnic conflict, like one we had in Sri Lanka, the involvement of the neighboring states becomes very important. How the neighboring states deal with this, because though it was happening in Sri Lanka or many other ethnic conflicts happen in one particular territory, but whether it's escalation or whether it will stop at one particular point of time will also depend on what's happening around. How the ethnic conflict is being played as a part of the foreign policy, part of international relations, and that's what happened. And interestingly, which I think which might have been in the presentation, was how post-accord, how India's peacekeeping forces were involved in Sri Lanka, and how it turned to be a terrible dream, which one would never have thought of. And in general, if you look at the modern nation states, they do support self-determination movements when it's happening in their neighborhoods. But when the people in their own state ask the same questions, then that becomes a terrorism. So it was self-determination movement for India, but when India is facing self-determination movement in Kashmir, in Nagaland, it becomes terrorism. And same as in Pakistan, when for them Kashmir is having self-determination movement, but when the question is asking Balochistan, it becomes terrorism. So it's kind of how those who were colonized now have become at least have gained the attitude of colonizers. They have forgotten their own history. You know,
Yeah, sorry.
So I was wondering the cases which you brought, and we have friends from India also here. There is also a similar situation, but in another form, where we have cup panchayat, and the married or married or who is having who's going to have a relation at home on the basis of caste or on the basis of ethnicity is decided by the cup panchayat, which is an extra constitutional body within the village.
Yeah, it existed.
And in that case, there is a lot of honor killings that happen. Did you come across the notion of honor killings in your case study?
Many, but I can't even question the panchayat. Because the minute I tried to question, and everyone got so offended, it's like me questioning the law and the lawmakers. And because they're old people who've been doing it for so long, because there've been many cases of honor killings, many. And some young children now who are studying in universities, they began questioning their elders because they understand there's something not right about this. But when they began questioning, they've been beaten up for questioning, they've been called all sorts of names for how they did it, because I don't know if it's a subcontinental phenomena, but there is this sense of you do not say anything when an elder talks. So if an elder said something, it's the word. And if someone as much as rebukes or questions that, like why, that's enough for someone to be completely disowned from that community. So yes, I came across that, but it was unfortunately one of those issues I couldn't even get into. I couldn't even get my hands dirty with that concept because it's very intricate to their culture and the way they operate, and then they feel like I am a foreigner and I don't know enough, and I am in a way invading them and their values, and you don't know what happens here and what kind of things we have to deal with. But panchayat, yes, exists quite a lot over there.
And one point, looking at the presentation which Galle made, if you take push it to the broader level, this debate of modernity versus tradition, where sometimes we are afraid of modernity, that it will take away everything from us what we have. Colonizers brought the modernity, or the modernity is coming to threat our own identity, which is very important. But then when we look at the tradition, why we have the traditions like this, then one is developed what to follow, or should we reflect to something from tradition and something from modernity, or should we...
One thing I just want to add to that particular point, that's exactly what I was trying to highlight is the fact that everyone, in trying to change it, it means changing traditions and people are touching onto traditions. And what I realize is with traditions, apparently, comes values. And with trying to change traditions, that means I am questioning their value set, or the fact that I'm trying to change their values. But then, if Vata Sata is their value, then isn't that value worth changing? And for them, there is nothing that's moral. And you can't get through to them, because if they look at you as if like, what are you even talking about? What is wrong with this? And so maybe, yes, there is a threat of modernity and it will come and change everything, but then maybe it will change everything. But something needs to be changed. But then how are you going to do that? that becomes a greater issue. How are you going to change those traditional things which when you associate anything with a value, its value completely changes. And traditions, I feel, becomes one of those things. It's also part of identity. Yes, quite. Absolutely.
I just wanted to bring in probably the piece that was important in the discussion. One of the reasons why I think the contributing factors to why that attack or forced marriage in South Africa is now deemed unconstitutional. I think it's because of a very interesting story of what probably my grandfather did, Nelson Mandela. The reason why he ended up in politics in the city, he grew up in one area just like me. He was groomed to be the leader of our ethnic group by the chief of the people. So now he was they chose a wife for him. So he was going to be forced into marriage. So what they did together with his brother, Chief Justice at the time, is to take the very same cow that they're going to use, one of the cows that they're going to use to marry a girl for him. They sold that cow and then they ran into the city, because he was forced to get married to a woman who was a woman of his best friend. He was the best friend of his best friend.
Exactly.
So the only solution was to say, let's eat the cow, sell it and run away. So later then, after 1994, I think that's why it ended in the South African Constitution that no one is allowed to be forced in the village. I think it's because of that.